This morning, we are blessed to have with us Scott Gillis from Creation Ministries International. While the world around us presents evolution as though it's settled and it's all taken care of, thankfully we have people like Scott who are going around showing that it's not settled, it's not a fact, but in fact what God teaches us in the Bible is true. And there's evidence for it, and it's wonderful, and it's very important, especially as we have any sort of discussion about these things. So, Scott, thank you so much. Thank you for Sunday school, and thank you again for speaking.
All right. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've already had a few people ask me who is Creation Ministries International, so let me see if I can get that out of the way. We literally are international in that we have offices in 7 countries on 5 continents. We speak in over 1,000 churches worldwide every year. Our Creation magazine goes out to 110 countries. Our resources, many of which we have here in the room behind us here, are translated into as many as 26 languages. We were founded 42 years ago, and we employ more PhD scientists than any ministry in the world. Is that just a little impressive? That's not what we're about, and let me see if I can explain that to you. How many of you, when you've been out sharing your faith, have had people ask you questions like this? I mean, did God really create in 6 days? I mean, after all, evolution has been proven to be a fact, and scientists have proven that it took millions of years. And what about the dinosaurs? What about carbon dating? How did all the animals fit on the ark? Where did all the races come from? Why does a loving God allow death and suffering? Now, do me a favor. If you've had people challenge you and your belief in the Bible by asking you questions like that, would you put your hand up in the air? And now keep it up and look around the room. See, that's what our ministry is about. We're here to answer those questions, to give you resources that you can use. And you can find the answers to our question on our website. Our website address is kind of hard to remember, so we're going to do a little science here this morning. Is that okay? I don't know if you knew this, but scientists have proven that when you say something audibly out loud with your mouth, you're more apt to have it imprinted into your brain. Did you guys know that? So would you guys all join me in saying this together? Creation.com. Now, can you remember that? Well, if you were to go there this afternoon, you'd find over 12,000 articles written by our scientists and professionals over the last 40 years, answering those and many more questions, including one about this guy. You guys remember we got some tragic news a number of years ago. What happened? He died, and how did he die? A stingray stung him in the heart. And people wrote into our ministry when this happened, and they said, oh yeah, well, why would a loving God create stingrays that can kill? Ha, gotcha. But you know what? It is a fair question. It goes back to Apologetics 101. Why does a loving God allow death and suffering? The answer is found in Genesis. And for those people that signed up for our free email newsletter, they received this article. And in only 10 days, this became our most visited article ever because believers like you, seeing that there was a biblical and scientific answer to what many consider to be a tough question, we're passing this article on to their family and friends, showing them that the Bible does have answers. And you know what? Our faith is challenged all the time in the news, am I right? Where we hear about the latest dinosaur discovery that proves evolution, or perhaps that missing link between ape-like creatures and man. Do you guys see those in the news? It happens every week. Well, chances are our scientists are writing a rebuttal that you can use in an easy-to-understand way so that you can help influence not just your own family, but maybe your extended family, your coworkers, and those people in your neighborhood. So if you guys want to be part of our ministry of sharing this information, I'd like to invite everyone here to sign up for a free email newsletter. We just need a name, an email address, and a zip code so we can let you know when things are happening in your neighborhood. So if the gentlemen that have those, if you could distribute those now, would you guys do me a favor when you get those, just pass those back, and we'll collect them up after the church service. But it'll help keep you up to date on the latest information. But how many people here know that kids hear about evolution 24/7? Am I right? And if that's the case, where are they going to hear a biblical answer? Is it going to be when they go to public school? Huh? How about when they turn on the TV? Certainly by the time they get to be in university? So please understand the heart of our ministry is to see believers around the world equipped with this information for the sake of their children and grandchildren, and to be more confident to share their gospel in the workplace. And you can find the answers to those questions again, everybody? All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. Now, you folks in Pennsylvania can probably tell because of my funny accent that I come from a foreign land. It's right, it's called California. No, I don't want you to hold that against me. I'm actually not a native of California. In fact, my parents were high school sweethearts at Butler High School, not too far from here. So my roots, I was born in Baltimore. So anyhow, yeah, if anybody's ever been to Butler, they used to have the Cummings soda fountain. Anybody ever been to Cummings in Butler? Oh, got somebody right back there. My parents dated in high school in Cummings, so that's pretty cool, all right? So anyhow, it's not there anymore, but nonetheless. Okay, I don't do this normally in most of my presentations, so now I'm all thrown off. But yeah, I did live in California for 29 years. It's where I raised my family. My wife is a native of California, and I'm not. But when I moved into that area, I did have to adapt to my environment. It's scientific. Every organism has to adapt to its environment, right? And in order to prove to you that I adapt to that California environment, here's me catching a wicked 12-inch wave, all right? And luckily, I have a graphic artist that works for me that makes me look a little bit more macho than I really am. But I would like to introduce you to my friend Sammy. Now, Sammy is a native Californian. He was born and raised there. He loves to surf. But also, get this, he's a California professional beach lifeguard. Now, a number of years ago, he was assigned to Pismo Beach. But it was his day off, and he took his quad out, and he was riding up and down the sand dunes all day long, enjoying the hot summer day. But as the sun came and hit the Pacific Ocean, he knew it was time to ride back to camp and rest up for his next day's work. However, a storm was coming in that night, and as he was riding down the beach, there were about a dozen people that were waving their arm, yelling to get his attention. So he drove over there, and as soon as he got off his quad, he saw what the problem was. You see, there was a surfboard there on the beach, but the surfer was 100 yards off. And on this night, the storm had come in and was creating waves with 8-foot faces that had picked up his body and was raking him through the lava rock below, and he was severely lacerated from head to toe, screaming in pain. So Sammy, even though he was exhausted, he had no flotation devices, he did decide to take off his helmet and his boots and those things that would weigh him down, and was able to find a rip current and was able to get out to that man, and he did bring him back to shore, and he actually saved his life. But let me ask you a question. Why did he do that while the other 12 people just stood there and watched? Somebody tell me why. Training. He was equipped. You see, he knew how to navigate those waves. He had been trained in that way. But I think our culture is kind of like that surf. You know, those waves are like questions that are crashing down on people like, is there a God? Does he love me? And is the Bible true? Now, am I right in that last one? It's been answered with a resounding no in our culture. Most people believe the Bible can't be true because evolution is obviously true, and the millions of years that come with it. And if that's the case, I believe it's like a tsunami that are pulling people away from the truth of God's holy word, that solid rock on which we are to stand. And those questions sometimes people wash people away, and they don't even consider the Bible to be true. But I'd like to start out with an important question for each one of us here this morning. It's more of a challenge. And that is, are you willing to train and equip yourself with the answers to the tough questions we are discussing this morning so that you can be the one that dives in and rescues the perishing while perhaps others just stand by and watch? You know, 1 Peter 3:15 says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. Now, does this sound like a suggestion or a command? It's a command, and it's for every believer. And by the way, this word answer comes from a Greek word, which is apologian. Now, apologian is a legal term. It was used in the courts of law in order to describe what an attorney would do in order to defend his client or perhaps prosecute the accused. Now, tell me this morning, does this sound like you? Are you always prepared, which is an action word, prepared with a defense for your faith, including in the area where the Bible is being attacked more than any other place? And that is in the creation and evolution debate. And folks, if you don't believe me on that one, just when you get home tonight, turn on your TV, open up the magazines, check the textbooks. Most people hear 24/7 that evolution in millions of years are a scientific fact. And it's an affront and attack on the Bible, and I believe it pulls people away from that truth. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about science this morning. I don't know how often you do that. I seem to do it every week or so. But did you know there are scientific statements in the Bible? In fact, in the very first chapter of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, there's a phrase that occurs 10 times. It says that God created plants and animals to reproduce after their what? Kind. Now, that basically means that dogs give birth to dogs, and pigs give birth to pigs, and corn kernels bring us corn plants. And does that happen here in Pennsylvania too? But when you think about it, it's really a genetic statement. The DNA that God created in those original kinds is passed on to future generations. And although those creatures do have the ability to adapt to their environment through natural selection and now random mutations, nonetheless, the Bible is very clear that it says that God created plants and animals to reproduce after their kind. But you know what? Most people hear a very different story than that, don't they? Most people hear that over millions and millions and millions of years, through the process of natural selection and random mutations, all right, that as those creatures pass on their genetic information to future generations, actually can change their DNA and add information to their genome so that they change into completely different kinds of creatures over millions of years. Now, do you see the difference between these two accounts, right? And our kids see the difference, right? And they're smart. If they were in science class, the teacher might say, now, when we're talking about science, you need to remember that we're dealing with facts, because facts are what science is about. But if you happen to be one of those people that goes to church and you believe Bible stories, and if those Bible stories give you hope and purpose and meaning in your life, I won't hold that against you. You can believe those Bible stories. But I want you to keep in mind that when we're dealing with science, you see here we're talking about facts. For example, let's say that you believe that Bible story that millions of Israelites walked across the Red Sea on dry land with two walls of water opposing gravity on either side. If Bible stories like that give you hope and purpose and meaning in your life, I won't hold that against you. You can believe those Bible stories. But I want you to remember that when we're dealing with science, you see here we're dealing with facts. Or, for example, you believe that Bible story that a man was in a fish for 3 days, a great big fish, and was somehow able to survive. Or that a man could walk on water that was not frozen. Or that a man could be clinically dead for 3 days and somehow self-resuscitate. Now, if Bible stories like that give you hope and purpose and meaning in your life, I won't hold that against you. You can believe those Bible stories, but remember, when we're talking about science, you see, there we're dealing with facts. Now, do you see the decision that has to be made? And it's not just our kids, am I right? I mean, do any of you have people in your family members that think you're just a little nuts for believing the Bible because science has proven that evolution in millions of years are a fact? So, this morning, are you prepared with a defense for your faith in this very area? And if we're not prepared with a defense, what's going to happen? Perhaps you've heard the Barna Institute statistics that tell us that 2/3 of children raised in Christian homes, by the time they get to be the age 18, are leaving the faith. That's kind of sobering, isn't it? And of course, we're talking about somebody else's kids, not ours, right? And to be fair, other denominations, when they heard this survey, they surveyed their own people and came up with completely different percentages of those leaving the faith. But can I ask you a question? Which percentage would be acceptable to you and your family? A couple years ago, we went on to college campuses here in the United States, and we made a little mini documentary where we went in and interviewed students that had said they had regularly attended church in the past. That was our first question. And for those that had regularly attended church, we asked them, do you believe in creation or evolution? Now, not surprisingly, the vast majority said they believed in evolution. But we asked them, had you ever been given any scientific evidence that supports the historical account of the Bible? And every single one of them, with one exception, said no. And none of them attended church anymore. However, of the 5, and only 5 students that we found that said they believed the biblical account of creation, we asked them, of course, if they had ever been given any scientific evidence that supports the historical account of the Bible, and it was unanimous in their case, and they all continued to attend church. Now, obviously, scientific studies say things along these lines, but I hope you can see how it's important for us to be equipped and prepared with a defense for our faith. It's like we said earlier this morning, Jesus said, if I've spoken to you of earthly things and you do not believe, then why would you believe when I speak of heavenly things? So if we don't believe the Bible because of things like evolution in millions of years, why would people even listen to the gospel? If it's not true there, do we get to decide and pick which parts of the Bible are true? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about science today. And in case you didn't enjoy science when you were in maybe junior high school, I don't want you to pull out a pillow and take a nap. I'm going to make it really easy to understand. But one concept that I really want to make sure everyone here understands is that when most people talk about science, they're talking about what we call experimental or operational science. Now, do you guys remember using the scientific method when you were in junior high school? Do you remember that, where you develop a hypothesis, you perform an experiment, you make observations, you record data, and you could repeat it? Do you guys remember using the scientific method? For example, let's say someone here this morning did not believe in the law of gravity, okay? We could actually do a test. We could come up and study that. We could move into the laboratory and make observations here in the present. We could record data. We could repeat it, and we could establish whether that law is true. You see, experimental science and operational science is the kind of thing that we do in order to develop laptop computers and smartphones and medical advances that benefit us all. But I want to make sure you understand this, that when we're talking about evolution, or for that matter, anything that happened in the past, did you know it's not this type of science? See, what we're talking about there is historic, or what many call forensic science. Now, let's say in the same way that someone here believed that a fish, over millions and millions of years of passing on its genetic information to future generations through the process of natural selection and random mutations, could eventually have a descendant that would have some new DNA that would allow it to create new novel structures that would allow it to walk up onto land. Okay, now, if you believe that to be true, can you do an experiment to show that's the case? Can you observe it happening? Is it repeatable? You see what we're talking about here? Now, this is a fossil, okay? This is Freddy the fish. Happened to know his name, okay? He was swimming along happily, and what happened to him, the scientific term is he got smushed, okay? Now, let me ask you guys a question. Does this fossil exist in the past or the present? Okay, I heard different answers to that question. Maybe I can qualify and clarify the question a little bit. Does this fossil, this one right here, does this fossil exist in the past or the present? Present. You see, all the evidence we have exists with us in the present. And when we dig up a dinosaur, does it come with a label on it that tells us how old it is or what it ate or anything about it? Now, you see, what we have to do is take the evidence that's with us in the present and we paint a picture of what happened in the past. And that's because the evidence, it doesn't speak for itself. I can do a little experiment. If you guys could hold it down a little while, let me listen. No, it doesn't. okay? We have to interpret the evidence. Now let me ask you another question. We're going to vote with a show of hands, and that is who has the most evidence, evolution or creation? How many people say evolution has the most evidence? Okay, how many people say creation has the most evidence? All right, can I ask you a follow-up question? When the paleontologists are looking at the fossil evidence that's available to us around the world, in the museums as well as in the various paleontological digs, okay? Do the creation scientist and the evolutionary scientist, they have the same or different evidence to observe in the present? Same. And when an astronomer is looking up at a distant galaxy through his telescope, and the light is coming back through his telescope, and maybe he's feeding it into his spectrometer, all right? Do the creation scientist and the evolutionary scientist, do they have the same or different evidence to observe in the present? Same. So let me ask you the question again. Who has the most evidence, evolution or creation? Okay, some of you guys are getting it, but I got deer in the headlights from most of you. So let's go ahead and do our own little experiment. Take a look at this fact, all right? Here's the hypothesis that I would like you to consider. What is missing, or what was this originally? I'm going to make it easier. I'm going to make it multiple choice. How many people think it was A? Okay, how about B? C? Not one optimist in this crowd. Interesting. Okay, how many people think it was D? Okay, you want to know the answer? I want you to think about this question before you answer. Why did you look for something missing? Because I told you to. See, what I did is I gave you what we call in science, I gave you what's called a presupposition. That's a really long word that means the assumptions that you use when looking at the evidence, depending upon your worldview, right? For you guys that were in there earlier. And indeed, most of you made a conclusion that was completely consistent with that presupposition, but since the presupposition was wrong, you were completely wrong. So some of you are thinking, I tricked you, but you know what? That was my point. Because I want to make sure you understand this. In fact, this is probably the most important thing I'm going to say this morning, and that is, in fact, I want students to listen mostly, okay? That is that when we're looking at the evidence, when we're opening up a textbook or reading an article or watching a program on evolution, I want to make sure you understand this. You are not being given facts. You're being given an interpretation of facts that's based on a presupposition that in the case of evolution has some very serious scientific problems. And I think we need to be like the Bereans. Do you guys remember those guys in the Bible? They went and they wanted to find out what the truth was, and shouldn't we do the same when it comes to this debate? You know, historic science is like that television show CSI, and I don't know if Pastor Pete or Pastor Nick allow you to watch such programs, but I only do so for research purposes myself. But just in case you didn't know, there are scientists digging up facts and evidence for a crime that happened in the past. And those facts and evidence are brought into the courtroom and presented before the jury and to attorneys. But notice, each attorney has a different interpretation. One of them is saying, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've seen the facts and evidence right before your eyes, right here in the present. And it obviously shows my client is innocent. You guys saw that. It was so obvious, right? And yet the other attorney is saying, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I don't know what facts he's talking about. Clearly, it shows that he's guilty. I mean, you saw the evidence right here with your own eyes. And this one's going to go, jury, did you notice he's misinterpreting the facts? And this one's saying, I'm not misinterpreting, he is. And it's up to the jury to decide which one makes the most sense, right? But in this case, the creation evolution debate that's in our culture, it is a battle going on with our own kids and grandkids, with those people in our neighborhoods, those people we work with. In this case, the jury out there, most of them have only heard one side of this story, am I right? And they didn't come here this morning, and you know what? I don't blame them. But when it comes to your families and your neighborhoods and your workplace, who is going to tell them the other side? All right, well, we're going to take a little bit of time to look at a little bit of evidence that makes sense of the historical account of the Bible. And I'm going to start out with an icon of evolution in millions of years. That's the Grand Canyon, which gives me an excellent opportunity to slip in a family vacation shot, okay? But if you were to go to the Grand Canyon today, you would, of course, be told that it took millions of years for those layers to be laid down and millions of years for the river to carve through those layers of rock, right? And indeed, when we look at the process of sedimentation, that's the process of laying down those layers, what we observe in the present, okay, is that it is a slow process. We get a little bit of dust on our windowsill and we sweep it off. So if what happens in the present is what's always happened in the past, then I would grant you it had to have taken millions of years. However, did you know that the evidence and facts are overwhelming, showing that these massive layers were laid down by water? And where do we find layers like this? I mean, the Grand Canyon, to be sure, but anywhere else? Like I said, when I was driving right here in your county and on my way from the Pittsburgh airport, I saw where they cut roads into the side of mountains, and guess what you see there, right? You see sedimentary layers hardened into rock. Now, I want to let you know, no matter where you go on the globe, you're going to find massive sedimentary layers like that. And guess what you find inside those layers, folks? Fossils. So let me ask you a question. Can you think of any historical event recorded in the Bible that might explain massive sedimentary layers laid down by water, including the evidence of dead things covering the entire planet? Does anything come to mind? You know, and I had a 16-year-old young man come up to me and he said, "You guys got to be kidding. You guys claim to be scientists. But you know what? You say you believe the Bible, and the Bible says that the highest mountains in the world were covered by water, and there's not enough water to do that." Ha, gotcha. So how do you answer a question like that? Well, I get excited because I can show them this. Yeah, where did that water come from? Do you guys remember in junior high school that 70% of this planet is covered by extremely, incredibly deep, deep oceans? In fact, did you know that if you were able to push all the continents and the mountains down and raise the ocean basins up and reform this planet like a perfect sphere, like a basketball, did you know that there would be almost 2 miles of water covering this planet with just the water that's in the ocean basins today? Now, does that sound like enough water for a cataclysmic worldwide flood like the Bible tells us about? Especially considering what we now know about plate tectonics and those forces that we believe that God used in order to raise the great continents out of the deep and create the big, huge mountain ranges that we have today. And speaking of those huge mountain ranges, here's Mount Everest. And in the sedimentary layers of the highest mountain in the world, we find fossilized marine invertebrates. That's clams and crabs. I've personally found ammonites at 8,000 feet. The Andes are filled with marine deposits, indicating that those layers, now at the top of the highest mountains in the world, were one time underneath the oceans, just like God's word has been telling us all along. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, do you see the evidence? See, the evidence supports the biblical account. It doesn't take millions of years. It's just a catastrophic process. And speaking of those layers taking millions of years, how about these? I mean, here's 24 feet of thousands of fine layers of rock. Now, did these take millions of years? I mean, certainly at least thousands, you would think, right? Actually, in this case, these layers were formed in just 3 hours. Right after the eruption of Mount St. Helens, which made a little impact on me since I was 63 miles from the volcano when it erupted. And this is just a little bit of the ash that was left 3 inches thick in my parents' front yard. Also an excellent opportunity to slip in yet another family vacation shot. But if you were to take your family to Mount St. Helens, you would stumble upon this canyon. It's kind of hard to miss because it's pretty big. It's 1/40th the scale of the Grand Canyon. And if you weren't there to see it formed, which none of you were, okay, you would logically assume that it took a really long time for that little bitty river to carve through those layers of rock, but you would actually be wrong, because this canyon was formed in only one day, and that was on March 19th, 1982, after a flow came through here at highway speed, cutting through the then soft layers, which only decades later have now been turned to rock. So does that look like anything else you've seen before? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, do you see? The evidence shows us it does not take millions of years. It just takes the right physical and chemical properties that would be brought to us by a cataclysmic worldwide flood like the Bible has been telling us all along. No millions of years, and guess what? If there aren't there, no time for evolution. You guys see that? It's pretty cool. You get to share that with your family and friends. Now, that same young man that challenged me about the water, that 16-year-old young man, he came up and he said, now, you guys are always talking about fossils, and you still say you're scientific, but everybody knows it takes millions of years to form a fossil. Ha, gotcha. So how do you answer a question like that? Well, I get excited, because we can talk about where fossils come from. Now, if you were here earlier this morning, you probably remember that if you went to a museum or open a textbook, you're likely to find that they'll say that Mr. Dinosaur dies and sinks to the bottom of the ocean, is slowly buried over millions of years. And then millions of years later, through the process of permineralization, his bones are turned to stone until finally a paleontologist discovers the dinosaur. And I will admit, at one time that made sense to me. But is this what we observe in the real world today? You see, a number of years ago, I took my daughter to Walmart, and I bought her 2 goldfish, and she named them Romeo and Juliet, okay? Now, that was on a Thursday. Just 2 days later, it was Saturday morning at 5 a.m., she is yelling from her room, Daddy, look, Daddy, hurry, come here, Daddy, you've got to see this, Daddy, hurry, look. And I want to let you know, at 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning, I'm an exceptionally gentle and patient father. As I came into her room, and I said, what? And she said, look, Daddy, Romeo is kissing Juliet. And being of a more scientific mind, I rubbed my eyes and took a closer observation and corrected her and said, no, honey, actually Romeo is, eating Juliet. Poor Juliet. And if any of you have fish at home in a fish tank and one of your precious fish die, where do you find it? Floating on top. And I want to let you know, if you don't believe me, you could do an experiment this afternoon, get a drop of cyanide. No, you don't want to do that, trust me. And when we're watching a documentary about sea life, is it true that when those beautiful HD cameras come on the bottom of the ocean, on the sandy bottom, we see thousands, if not millions, of sea creatures just lying there waiting over millions of years to be slowly buried? That's not what we observe in the real world. So you see, if I really wanted to make a fossil of my daughter's remaining goldfish, what I had to do was sneak into her room in the middle of the night with a shovel of concrete and throw it in there just really quickly. Yeah, my wife didn't think it was funny either. But is there any evidence that shows us that the only way we can get a fossil is through rapid and catastrophic burial like we would find in the flood? Well, take a look at this. Here's a fish buried so quickly it was caught right in the middle of having lunch. Or how about this? Here is a school of fish. In fact, 257 fish captured, all schooling and going in the same direction. Do you think they posed like that over millions of years? Catastrophic event. Or how about this one? Here's an ichthyosaur in the process of giving birth. Now, my first son, my wife was in labor for 48 hours. But really, millions of years? Okay? How about this? Here's a hat that was buried for only 20 years. You might say it evolved from a soft hat into a hard hat. Or in this case, we have a bag of flour after only decades turned to stone. Or in this case, this teddy bear was completely calcified in 3 to 5 months. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, do you see? It does not take millions of years. It takes the right physical and chemical properties that would be brought to us by a worldwide flood. Okay, as the Bible has been telling us all along. Hey, I want to just take a break really quick here and ask you guys a question. Those examples that I just shared with you, was I talking over anybody's head? I mean, did you guys understand that information? Okay? And that's what we try to do, is give you information that's easy to understand, that you can share with your children and grandchildren at any age, as well as maybe go out into your neighborhoods and your coworkers that don't know Christ because they believe science has proven that the Bible is wrong. Each one of us is commanded to defend our faith, and that's our heart, is to help you understand that. So I hope you can see that this is not hard to do. You can each do this for the sake of your families as well as being more confident to share the gospel. All right, now, I already know that there's people out there thinking, in fact, I've spoken to a few of them just in between Sunday school here, that are thinking, what's the big deal about millions of years? I mean, you keep bringing that up. I mean, the Bible, after all, is a book of morality. I mean, shouldn't we just stick with important doctrines of the Bible? It doesn't matter how long those days were. But do you think if we could add millions of years into the Bible, do you think it might make some impact on some important doctrines? Well, let's take a look at that. In the Old Testament and the New Testament, okay, we find genealogies. Have you noticed there's a lot of them there, you know? And in the Old Testament, it says that so-and-so was so old when his son was born, and he was so old when his son was born, and he was so old when his son was born, and he was so old when his son was born. We can actually add up those generations, and we'll get a reliable time span from Adam all the way up to Abraham. Now, does that make sense so far? You guys tracking with me? And then, do you notice how God tells us how long the captivity in Egypt was, exactly how many years it was, and exactly how long the Exodus was, and that this king ruled for this many years, followed by this king for this many years, followed by this king for this many years? We can actually add up all those historical events that God's told us exactly how long the time was. And we'll get a reliable time span from Adam all the way up to Jesus, and we'll know all the historical events that happened during that time span. Does that make sense to you guys? So if we believe that the scientists are right about evolution, and for that matter, the millions of years, and we want to force millions of years into the Bible, can we squeeze them between Adam and Jesus? No. But you know what a lot of people do? They say, well, each day in Genesis could represent millions of years. Have you guys heard that idea? I was just talking to a few people about that now, but I want to let you know that if you take that view, there's a big theological problem with it, and I'm holding it in my hand right here. And that is that if indeed these fossils took millions of years, as we're told, through that evolutionary story, that would mean we have death before the fall, death before the curse. Now, does it sound like we might be touching on an important doctrine? Let's take a look at that a little further. Now, in the last verse of Genesis chapter 1, God said that his creation wasn't just good, but the seventh time he said it was what? Very good. So what does a very good world look like? Well, check this out. You see, just a couple verses earlier, God said, I give you plants for food. So not to disappoint you people in Pennsylvania, but that means in that perfect paradise, there was no barbecue. But notice in the next verse, he gives the animals the same command. He said, I give you plants for food. So that means that both man and animal were what? Vegetarian in that perfect world before death, which, by the way, the word vegetarian comes from an ancient Hebrew term that means bad hunter. But just in case you feel guilty because you had bacon with your eggs this morning, I want to let you know that later on God said, just as I gave you green plants for food, I now give you what? Everything for food, which some people use as biblical justification to eat things like this. Everything? Well, some of you got it, but okay. You've got to understand that that very good world that God created in the beginning was a paradise. There was no death. There's no sorrow. There's no pain. It was a perfect place. We were to live in harmony with our Creator for eternity. But you all guys know that we don't live in a world like that anymore, do we? Because you see, God commanded Adam, he said that when you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will what? Surely die. See, this is when death came into the world. And the New Testament authors, over and over again, they show that this is the case. Because if you had to summarize the Bible in just a few sentences, you could do it like this. You could say, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and it was a perfect paradise. We were to be with our Creator for eternity and live in harmony. Not this one, the real one, okay? I just thought of that. We are living in harmony, aren't we? But talking about the other kind. But because of Adam's sin, death came into the world, because we worship a loving God who's also a just God, and you need to be thankful for that. And the penalty for sin is what? Death. This is when death came into the world, and every descendant of Adam inherited that sin nature. And that includes everyone in this room and everyone that ever has and ever will live on this earth, inherited that sin nature, and along with it, the penalty of death. But God sent a rescue mission, didn't he? He came down, his own son, as God incarnate, who knew a perfect life that never sinned, that took all of our sin upon himself on the cross in a sacrifice to become God's lamb, a perfect sacrifice for eternity, so that in the future, and I want you guys to hear this part, in the future, there will be a new earth and a new heaven created. Have you heard about that? And guess what? There will be no more sorrow, no more death, no more pain. Is anybody else looking forward to that for those that are in Christ? But yet, when we say that that paradise had millions of years of death and destruction in those sedimentary layers, including the evidence of dead things, before Adam, millions of years before he was around, before sin, do you see how we're impacting the very gospel of Jesus Christ, which is paradise created, paradise lost, and paradise restored in the future new heavens and new earth? We can't have it that way. And I want to let you know something more exciting than that. Because the evidence, the facts tell us that it doesn't take millions of years. It's scientific. And if those millions of years are explained by Noah's flood, instead of the millions of years of evolutionary time, guess what? Evolution disappears and supports the historical account of the Bible. And it should bring us joy to know that God's word is true. And we need to stand by it and defend it and let other people know. And if you don't think it's an important thing, let's take the word of an atheist for it. I mean, this atheist in a debate with a Christian, he said this. He said, the most devastating thing, though, that biology did to Christianity was the discovery of biological evolution. He went on to say, now that we know that Adam and Eve were never real people, the central myth of Christianity is destroyed. And this atheist went on to say, you know what? If there never was an Adam and Eve, then there never was an original sin. And you know what? If there never was an original sin, then there's no need of salvation. And if there's no need of salvation, then there's no need of a Savior. So I submit that puts Jesus, historical or otherwise, into the ranks of the unemployed. I think evolution is absolutely the death knell of Christianity. And he's right, as well as the millions of years that go along with them. And I've had people tell me, you know, the whole issue of millions of years, I mean, it causes division in the church. You know, I mean, after all, we worship a big and powerful God. And he could have created in any way he wanted. And you know what? I'll agree with you. He could have created in any way he wanted, but don't you think it's about time that we allow God to tell us how he created through his word? And speaking of causing a huge division in the church, what about this guy? This is what he had to say on the subject. He says, when Moses writes that God created heaven and earth and whatever is in them in 6 days, if you cannot understand how this could have been done in 6 days, then please grant the Holy Spirit the honor of being more learned than you are. For you are to deal with Scripture in such a way that you bear in mind that God himself says what is written, but since God is speaking, it is not fitting for you to turn his word in the direction you wish to go. Now, the nature of our culture might be better stated by a more modern theologian that you're familiar with. And this is what he had to say. He said, The church used to hang the whole thing on one hook. If you don't do these things, if you don't act morally, then you're going to burn in hell. But listen to what he said next. He said, unfortunately, with what we know about science, and he's talking about evolution there and the millions of years, anyone who thinks at all probably doesn't believe in that fire and brimstone stuff anymore. So you know what? Organized religion, you have lost that voice to hold up your moral hand. And have you ever heard that before in our culture? He's basically saying now that science has proven that evolution with its millions of years is fact, then that means that the Bible that you guys claim to believe in, science has proven it wrong. And if the geology and astronomy and biology are wrong, then that means the morality, which is contained in the same biblical text, is therefore also wrong. So you Christians, you have no right to tell me how to live my life. But you know what? I'll tell you what we're going to do. If you guys want to believe those Bible stories, and if they give you hope and purpose and meaning in your life, I won't hold that against you. You can believe those Bible stories. And that way you can believe what you want to believe, and I'll just believe what I want to believe, and we can just coexist and get along. I mean, that way you'll be okay, and I'll be. Wait, am I going to be okay? In an eternal sense? But isn't this a reflection of what our culture is telling us right now? So, are we ready and equipped to demolish arguments today that stand up against people knowing the Creator, Jesus Christ? The Bible says that by him and through him all things were created. And I think we need to take his word for it. And there's a lot of questions that people have that we were dealing with this morning, but there's many, many more. And we need to be equipped with answers to all those questions. So I hope you don't mind me being very, very practical right now. How many people here know that there is a battle going on for the souls of men waging right now? And if there is, I want to let you know that the front line of that battle in challenging the Bible, the intellectual barrier of evolution, is really waging against people even considering that the Bible is true in the first place. And here, we are commanded to be prepared with a defense for our faith. And preparation, that's an action verb, okay? We're commanded to prepare ourselves, to equip ourselves with a defense for our faith. And not just to win the argument for those people that were here this morning, but with a gentle and respectful attitude to help people understand that the Bible's historical account is true as opposed to what they've been told most of their lives, so that the Holy Spirit can have his way. And they begin to see that the Bible's historical account is true, then those spiritual things, the gospel is also true, so that the Holy Spirit can have his way and bring them to the kingdom of heaven. And each of us are commanded to be prepared to do just that. So, again, I hope you don't mind me being practical. I remember about 10% of sermons for 10 minutes, and then it's gone. I'm sure that's not true with Pastor Pete. You probably meditate on his sermon all week long, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, but if you did listen to a recording of it a second or third time, you would understand it, right? That's called preparation. So you guys may have seen that in the room right back here that we did bring some resources. Now, we don't charge a set fee when we come to church. We don't charge a fee, but we don't make money on these things just to support our ministry. It's the people that donate to our ministry that do that. But the reason we bring these resources is because we see a vision of believers around the world equipped with a defense for their faith, not just for the sake of their families and their kids and grandkids, but also to be more effective in sharing the gospel out there in a culture that needs to know the Lord. So, again, I hope you don't mind being practical on this word preparation. I want to just kind of focus in on one particular resource where we get more testimonies of people coming to know Christ more than any other one, and that's Creation Magazine, which we've been publishing for over 41 years. It's the most read publication of its kind in the world, but here's the thing. It's really easy to understand. It comes into your mailbox quarterly. It's 56 pages long, but there's no advertising in it. Now, I don't know if you guys get magazines at home, but if you took the advertising out, would you have 56 pages left? But what's left in here isn't just a good recipe for butternut squash. This is stuff that will help equip you and your family to have a better defense for your faith. So and just as a little incentive, if you do subscribe today for 1 year subscription, if you do subscribe, then you will get also, not only will you get the quarterly magazine, but you'll get a newsletter every month that has some articles that will help equip you. You get the digital version, 5 copies of the magazine that people can put on their tablets and iPads. You know, everybody in your family can have their own copy, digital, on top of the one that you get in the mail. And so if you do the 1 year, you'll get to take the current issue home with you today, and you can start reading this afternoon. If you do a 2 year, you get that plus 2 DVDs. This is an amazingly well-done documentary that was in theaters around the world, featuring Darwin and talking about how he made his conclusions and how the evidence actually, he'd come to a different conclusion if he were alive today, as well as that other one that I mentioned, where you can hear university students in their own words tell why they left the church, with our scientists answering their challenges, giving you answers that you can use. So in a moment, when we circulate this form, of course, we need to have a name and address. On the back, if you guys want to do gift subscriptions, go ahead and you can fill that out as well. But once you get that filled out, if you tear that off and pass the form on, you can bring it back here, and I've got some volunteers to help. So guys, if you could do that now, and again, as you get those, if you could pass those back. And while those are going around, I'm just going to share with you 2 examples that you can start using today, answering. In fact, some people like this part of the presentation the best. A gentleman asked me about carbon dating this morning. But let me give you an example. We reported how a sample was taken from a volcanic lava dome and sent to a laboratory, and they did potassium argon dating on it, and they got an age of 350,000. I want you to pay attention. There's a young lady I talked to earlier today. I don't see her right now, but I want you to pay attention, young lady. Then they took a mineral out of that sample, and this time they got 900,000 years, and a third mineral they came out, and this time it was up to 2.8 million. Now, it was the same sample, sent to the same potassium argon dating lab using the same mass spectrometer, but they got all these different dates. So which one do you guys think is right? Actually, none of them are, because this sample came from the Mount St. Helens lava dome, and the rock was formed only 10 years before. So if we get incorrect radioisotope dates of rocks when we know the age, do you think that might bring into question the radioisotope dates we get when we don't know the age? And then this is one of my favorite things. Probably the guy on the plane sitting next to me tomorrow is going to hear about this one. But did you know that they found inside the femur of a T-Rex bone, they found red blood cells? Any of you guys ever heard about that? Dr. Mary Schweitzer, who made this original discovery, she said this. She said, "I got goosebumps. It was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone, but of course I couldn't what? Believe it. I said to the lab technician, the bones, after all, they are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long?" And you know what? That's a really good question. But you know what? It got more exciting, because later on they dissolved the bony matrix, and what they found inside was soft, fibrous tissue that was stretchy. In fact, here's a video of that first discovery right there. Does that look 65 million years old to you? And listen to what she said. She said, "It was totally shocking. I didn't what? Believe it until we'd done it, what? 17 times. Do you guys remember when we were talking about operational science that's done in the laboratory right before our eyes in the present? But she couldn't believe it. And you know what? I don't blame her, because sometimes our faith is really strong and we have a hard time letting go. But I would like to share with you a different interpretation of this evidence brought to you by the scientists worldwide in our organization. I'm going to go out on a limb here and share with you a different interpretation. Would that be okay? The dinosaur bones are not 65 million years old. Just a different interpretation. Please consider that, okay? Anyhow, I hope you can see how you can be prepared with the answers. If you did enjoy this presentation, if you have family members in another church, I have a couple pastors' packs. Love to give them to you so that you could pass that on so that other people can hear this information. The website, again, where you can get answers is what, everybody? creation.com. The answers book, which we talked about this morning, answers 60 of the most asked questions. About 3/4 of them were sold after Sunday school, but we still have a starter pack, which includes the answers book as well as refuting evolution. And the answers in here, the questions are things about dinosaurs, carbon dating, and my favorite question, where did Cain get his wife when he wasn't Abel? Also included in the starter pack is the biggest selling creation book of all time, and you'll get like a free DVD. So we still have plenty of starter packs left, a good place. And then the only other thing I want to feature is Evolution's Achilles' Heels. This documentary won second place at the Christian Worldview Film Festival. And it features 15 PhD scientists in a very high quality production where we've seen people who believed in evolution after only an hour and a half change their mind like that. So I hope you guys can see how this information, but I'd like to conclude with the question, the challenge that we started with today, and that is, are you willing to equip and train yourself with the answers to the tough questions that people are asking, so that you can be the one that dives in and rescues the perishing, while perhaps others just stand by and watch, so that you can fulfill this command to always be prepared, to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. All right, thank you guys very much.